It is night, the hour when the world exhales and the air feels just a little heavier. Perhaps you are lying down, the day folded neatly away. The lights are dim, and only your thoughts wander. And tonight, they wander to the Middle Ages, to a world of stone castles, dark churches, and whispered fears. A world, we are told, where torture chambers lurked beneath the floors, where terrible devices waited for unfortunate prisoners. And among those devices, one looms larger than all the others: a coffin of iron, a maiden of steel, a terrible box lined with spikes, the Iron Maiden. You have likely seen it in books, in movies, in haunted houses. A tall sarcophagus with a face, sometimes serene, sometimes cruel, and inside, rows of sharp points like the teeth of a monster waiting to swallow. It seems medieval. It seems cruel. It seems to fit the story we tell about those times: harsh, violent, unforgiving. But here's the quiet twist. The Iron Maiden was not quite what you think, and tonight we will wander slowly through its tale. From myths to museums, from strange showmen to cautious scholars, until we find that the story of this torture device is not about cruelty at all. It is about imagination, about fear, about how we tell stories of the past that are harder than truth and sharper than any spike. So, let us begin. Imagine a chest, not for gold or jewels, but tall, standing like a person. A coffin you could walk into if you dared. Now add a face, a painted lid sometimes in the form of a woman, a saint, a maiden, sometimes beautiful, sometimes blank. And then, imagine spikes. Not too many, just enough that if you were shut inside, you would not be at ease. This is the Iron Maiden, or at least the picture of it that has been carried into the modern mind. And yet, if you walk backward into time, step by step, century by century, you will not find it. Not in the medieval torture chambers of the 12th century, not in the dungeons of the 14th, not even in the Inquisition of the 15th. The further back you go, the more it disappears, until, in the Middle Ages themselves, there is nothing. No mention of an Iron Maiden, no drawings of it, no records of it being used. Silence. It seems the device we call medieval is, in truth, not medieval at all, but myths have roots. And the roots of the Iron Maiden sink deep into something older, stranger, and perhaps even more unsettling than iron spikes. Long before iron coffins, the ancients told stories of punishment machines. The Greeks whispered of the Brazen Bul, a hollow statue of brass shaped like a bull with a door in its side. A criminal would be placed within, a fire lit beneath, and the person cooked alive. Their screams, legend says, came out of the bull's mouth as the bellow of an angry animal. It is a story of invention and cruelty, but also a story of imagination. For historians today are not certain if the Brazen Bul ever truly existed, or if it was only a tale told to frighten, to accuse, to remind people of the dangers of tyranny. Already, we see a pattern. The human mind invents devices of horror, sometimes to warn, sometimes to entertain, sometimes simply because the thought of it is sticky and will not go away. The Iron Maiden seems to stand in this line of invention, not built for use, but built for story. If you ask the story of the Iron Maiden where it begins, it will point you to Germany, to the city of Nuremberg. In the year 1515, a man named Johann Philipp Siebenkees wrote of a device that sounded suspiciously like the Iron Maiden. He claimed that a coin forger, an unlucky counterfeiter, was placed into a spiked coffin and left to die. But here is the catch. Siebenkees was not a medieval chronicler. He was a scholar writing much later. His account may have been more imagination than history. And even if he had some truth, the object itself was not from the Middle Ages. The first real, physical Iron Maidens appear not in dungeons of the 1200s, but in curiosity collections of the 1700s and 1800s. It was then, in an age fascinated by death, torture, and the macabre, that the Iron Maiden walked out of legend and into wood and iron. The Middle Ages never built it, but the 18th century very much wanted them to have. The Enlightenment, the 1700s, an age of science, reason, and strange museums. Collectors were gathering oddities, mummies from Egypt, relics from saints, armor from knights, skulls from battlefields, and alongside them, instruments of torture. It was here that the Iron Maiden appeared, not as a functioning tool of punishment, but as a curiosity to display. A dramatic, terrible object that could say to visitors, "Look how cruel the past was. Look how much better we are now." In truth, the Iron Maiden was stitched together. Old coffins, old statues, old iron fragments, reassembled into a monster that history never made. The most famous of these was the so-called Nuremberg Iron Maiden, first displayed in the early 19th century. It was tall, terrifying, and impressive. Tourists stared, writers described it, and soon the myth was alive. The Iron Maiden was no longer just a whisper in a scholar's book. It had become a physical thing, a thing you could point at, shiver at, and remember. And here, for now, we will pause. We have followed the Iron Maiden from a coffin of spikes in the imagination, through the legends of ancient torture, into the writings of scholars, and finally into the cabinets of collectors. But the story is not finished, because what happened next was stranger still. The Iron Maiden became not just a museum piece, but a star. It spread across Europe, across America, across books and circuses and even rock bands. It became less an object and more a symbol of cruelty, of the Middle Ages, of the darker corners of human history, from carnival exhibitions to Victorian horror stories, from Nazi propaganda to heavy metal. The Iron Maiden may not have been real in the Middle Ages, but it certainly became real in ours. The 19th century loved a good shiver. The Victorians, dressed in black silk and lace, wandered through museums where skeletons leaned in dusty glass and mummies slept in bandaged silence. The Iron Maiden fit perfectly here. It was not only gruesome, it was theatrical. The Nuremberg version, pieced together from medieval fragments, was placed proudly on display. Guides explained to visitors how it had been used on criminals, heretics, or unlucky lovers of counterfeit coins. It was said that when the doors closed, the spikes would pierce just enough to wound, not kill. A prisoner would bleed slowly, trapped between iron walls, dying over hours. It was a perfect balance of horror and patience. People believed it. They wanted to believe it. For the 19th century saw the Middle Ages not as they were, but as a shadowed backdrop, a stage set of dungeons, witches, and cruel kings. To imagine an Iron Maiden in that darkness felt right. And so, visitors walked away murmuring, perhaps appalled, perhaps secretly delighted. The Iron Maiden had done its work, not in punishment, but in performance. The Nuremberg Maiden did not stay still. She traveled, sometimes exhibited in Germany, sometimes abroad. Copies were made, new versions appeared in London, Paris, and eventually across the Atlantic, each one slightly different, some with serene female faces, others with grimacing masks, some bristling with spikes, others almost bare, like a carnival attraction. The Iron Maiden became part of a culture of oddities, displayed alongside shrunken heads, pickled animals, and wax figures of criminals. For a penny, you could stare. For a shilling, you could be horrified. This is where the device truly became famous. Not in medieval dungeons, but in traveling exhibitions where its story was told again and again until repetition made it real. It was less a machine of death and more a mirror of fear. People saw in it the cruelty they wanted the past to hold. By the 20th century, the Iron Maiden's legend was firmly in place. It had appeared in books, in illustrations, in countless retellings. But it found new life in one of the darkest chapters of recent history: the Nazis. In the 1930s and 40s, Nazi propaganda often portrayed the medieval world in terms of blood and soil, cruelty, and strength. They wanted to show the German past as both terrifying and glorious, and the Iron Maiden fit this perfectly. In some accounts, the Gestapo even displayed the Nuremberg Maiden as evidence of Germany's brutal medieval justice. They wanted it to seem authentic, ancient, inevitable. But in doing so, they gave new weight to a myth. The Iron Maiden was now not only a museum oddity, it had become an ideological symbol. And so, the myth hardened, like wet clay left in the sun. Strange things happen to old stories. Sometimes they crumble, sometimes they grow stronger, and sometimes they grow louder. In 1975, a British rock band took its name from the device Iron Maiden. They were loud, fast, and theatrical. Their logo was sharp as steel. Their mascot, Eddie, grinned like a corpse brought back to life. The band had nothing to do with medieval torture, but the name was perfect: short, dangerous, unforgettable. Through their fame, the Iron Maiden gained a new life. For a generation of music fans, it became less a torture device and more a symbol of rebellion, noise, and raw energy. And so, the coffin of spikes lived on, in guitars and posters, in stadiums and t-shirts, a medieval device that was never medieval at all, now immortal in song. So, what was the truth? Historians now agree that the Iron Maiden was never used in the Middle Ages. The physical examples we see today are fabrications, built in the 18th and 19th centuries from older fragments. They were never used on criminals, never employed by inquisitors, never bloodied in dungeons. The true devices of medieval punishment were far simpler: racks, whips, ropes, stocks, brutal enough on their own. The Iron Maiden was a dream or a nightmare made real only centuries later. It tells us more about the people who built it in the 1700s than the people who lived in the 1200s. It shows us how we imagine the past as darker than it was, how we polish cruelty into legend, how we take ordinary history and sharpen it into spikes. And so, we return to the present. The night is still quiet. Perhaps the world outside your window is hushed. Perhaps your eyelids are heavy. The Iron Maiden stands now mostly in museums, its doors closed, its spikes blunt. Not a weapon, but a curiosity, a story in iron. It was never what we thought. Not medieval, not real, but in another way, it was very real indeed, because it lived in imagination, in books, in circuses, in propaganda, in music. It punished not the flesh, but the mind. History is often like this. Less about what happened, more about what people believed happened. The Iron Maiden reminds us that legends are powerful. They can outlive truth, they can step out of shadows and stand taller than fact. So, when we think of the Middle Ages as cruel and spiked, let us pause. Let us remember that sometimes the sharpest blades are forged not in iron, but in story. And with that, I wish you rest. May your night be soft, your sleep untroubled, and your dreams free of iron coffins.